In a toy line built entirely on the promise of more than meets the eye, the whole point was transformation. Transformers didn't just look cool, but demanded you flip, turn, open, compress, twist, and sometimes straight up finagle them into becoming something else entirely. And let's be honest, missing a step was inevitable, and a mistransformation could mean mild frustration at best, or at worst, anger, and the occasional plastic projectile thrown against the wall. But every once in a while, something unexpected happens. Sometimes a mistake doesn't ruin the toy, it gives it a new identity, creating a striking visual, a new silhouette, an iconic look that doesn't just stand out, but permanently redefines a character. When the Transformers first hit shelves in 1984, you could say that the Decepticon bench was pretty short, especially when you stack them up against the whole parking lot of Autobot cars Hasbro rolled out in year one. But what the bad guys lacked in numbers, they more than made up for in impact, because almost every Decepticon from that first wave was a straight up banger. No weird windshield faces or gorilla armed auto duds, just clean, memorable designs across the board. And a trigger crotch. But if we're talking immediate standouts, if you ask me, it's hard to beat the trio of sleek winged warriors that turned into one of the most iconic jets of the 1980s. Starscream, Thundercracker, and Skywarp didn't just look cool, they felt elite. That shared design paired with three very distinct personalities turned them into instant fan favorites, and before long, they weren't just toys anymore, they were the Seekers. And you know how this goes: when something works, you don't fix it, you make more of it. So it was no surprise that when the second year rolled along, Hasbro took that winning formula and gave us more Seekers. With a twist. See, as awesome as the original Seeker trio was, they were basically the same toy, same jet, same parts, just dipped in different paint. And heading into year 2, Hasbro probably realized that cranking out even more straight up repaints might start getting a little confusing. So instead of just repainting the repaint, Hasbro decided to shake things up a bit. The next batch of Seekers got retooled wings, and at least 2 of them showed up packing brand new weapons. And just like that, in 1985, Thrust, Ramjet, and Dirge officially joined the Decepticon ranks. I still remember the first time I saw these guys, courtesy of those old toy commercials burnt permanently into my brain. Flying in to clash with Optimus Prime's shiny new lineup of Autobot cars, Smokescreen, Trax, Hoist, Inferno, Red Alert, and Grapple, came Thrust and Dirge, flanking Megatron on either side, which I guess meant that Ramjet was off somewhere on vacation with the Autobot skids or something. Now, at first glance, the differences weren't exactly obvious. Yeah, the wings looked a little different, but if you were paying attention, those quick animated shots of their robot modes hinted that something else was going on. To really separate the new Seekers from the original trio, animation art director Floro Derry leaned harder into the toy designs themselves. Thrust, Dirge, and Ramjet ended up with robot modes that felt more squat and angular, like the toys had stepped straight off the shelves and onto the screen. Their upper legs were barely visible, swallowed by oversized knee pads and chunky lower legs, while the wings were flipped the other way so that the wider end sat at the bottom, giving them a heavier, more aggressive stance than Starscream and company. But the biggest difference? The heads. While the original Seekers had those blocky helmets with the little side vents, these 3 showed up with something else entirely: their jet nose cones. Parts that were supposed to fold back to form the normal Seeker head were instead left pointing straight up, which, intentional or not, made it look like they were wearing literal traffic cones on their heads. And just like that, the fandom had a name for them: the Coneheads, a nickname borrowed straight from that old Saturday Night Live sketch featuring a deadpan family of cone-headed aliens, played by Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin, and Lorraine Newman. And while, yes, it did look weird, the pointy heads were memorable and impossible to unsee. Now, while none of the Coneheads ever really hit the same level of popularity as their predecessors, and more often than not tended to get lumped together as a set, Thrust, Ramjet, and Dirge do have pretty distinct personalities, at least on paper, thanks to their tech specs. And that was more than enough to give later writers something to grab onto and actually build from. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at what's hiding underneath the cones and get to know these pointy-headed Decepticons one at a time, starting with the first one that ever caught my attention, Thrust. So, based on his tech specs alone, it makes perfect sense that Thrust was the one who immediately stood out for me, and I'm guessing to a lot of other people too. For starters, just look at him. While his cone bros Dirge and Ramjet came in blue and white respectively, colors we'd already seen plenty of thanks to Thundercracker and Starscream, Thrust shows up as a deep red jet. That alone made him pop, and he had yellow eyes, a rarity with Decepticons, but I guess a necessity to stand out against all that red. And then there were the wings, where Dirge and Ramjet had similar triangular setups stretching towards the back. Thrust came in with those distinctive rotor-style wings that instantly pulled your eye. Dare I say, he looked cooler, louder, more extra, which, fittingly, is exactly the point. Because if there's one thing Thrust wants, it's attention. My engine's roar is my enemy's song of doom. Thrust believes that knowing is half the battle. No, wait, sorry, wrong franchise. Thrust believes that half the battle is won before it even starts, as long as the Autobots hear him coming. He rattles the air with his engines, talks himself up non-stop, and makes absolutely no effort to be sneaky. Subtlety to Thrust is for Decepticons who don't know how to make an entrance. Thrust brags constantly, announces victory before the fight has even begun, and delights in causing as much collateral damage as possible on his way in, just to make sure everyone's paying attention. The noise, the trash talk, the dramatic arrival, it's all meant to psych out his opponents and create the illusion of overwhelming force. But here's the thing. That's all it is. Everything Thrust uses is an illusion. Behind all that roar and bravado is a dude who isn't that particularly brave. A strong counterattack is often all it takes to shake Thrust's nerve and send him retreating. Among the Decepticons, that reputation sticks. He ruins stealth missions, overpromises results, and folds once things stop going his way. All that bluster? It's armor, a carefully crafted persona meant to hide the fact that beneath the noise and boasting, Thrust is far more fragile than he'd ever admit. Next up is Ramjet, and while his name technically comes from a type of jet engine that relies on sheer forward motion to compress air for combustion, when it comes to this guy, the concept is way simpler. Ramjet is a jet that loves crashing into other jets. That's it. That's the pitch. If it flies, crash it. Pretty much says everything you need to know. Mid-air collisions are Ramjet's specialty, and he genuinely does not care what or who he's hitting. Enemy jet? Sure. Civilian aircraft? Also fine. Another Decepticon in the wrong place at the wrong time? Oopsie. Ramjet doesn't just rule the skies, he treats them like his personal demolition zone. As far as he's concerned, the air up there belongs to him, and anything sharing it without permission is asking to get taken out at full speed. And the messed up part? He enjoys it. Ramjet gets his kicks from pain. His own or anyone else's doesn't matter. Smashing into another aircraft at top velocity is thrilling to him, especially because no one ever expects another jet to willingly ram them. He lives for that split second of surprise right before impact, built to survive these collisions far better than his victims. Ramjet takes a twisted pride in knocking other flyers out of the sky, all while loudly bragging about it afterwards. Of course, even Ramjet's luck has limits, despite a glitch in his pain receptors that give him an absurdly high tolerance for damage. All those crashes add up. Ramjet's internal systems take a beating over time, and his delusions of invulnerability make things worse. Ramjet refuses to admit when he's pushed himself too far, choosing instead to power through and rack up even more damage rather than acknowledge he might not be as indestructible after all. And to add to Ramjet's painfully literal crash and burn lifestyle, or actually, most likely because of it, Ramjet is fully convinced that he's an evil genius, completely unaware of how ridiculous he looks to everyone else. But we'll get into that side of him a little later. Funny thing is, For the longest time, Ramjet didn't really do much for me. Like I said, I was all about thrust, loud, flashy, center stage thrust. But Ramjet ended up being the only Conehead I ever actually owned, thanks to a surprise Christmas gift from my sister visiting from the States. And once I had him in hand, everything changed. Suddenly, a jet whose entire battle strategy was fly directly into the enemy became the coolest thing in the world. And just like that, Ramjet earned the title of my favorite Conehead of the bunch as a kid. Because as an adult, that title transferred over to Dirge, easily the least flashy of the Coneheads, and yet over time, one who has quietly become my favorite of the trio. As a kid, I barely gave him a second look. At face value, he felt unassuming, just another blue jet, and honestly, I wrote him off as an unnecessary Thundercracker retread. But where Thundercracker was often portrayed in lighter, almost baby blue tones, Dirge is painted in something much darker, a deep, brooding blue that perfectly matches what I now see as the most layered and frankly, the most depressing Conehead of the bunch. Fear is the element that unites all losers. That line alone tells you exactly who Dirge is. Where Thrust tries to overwhelm you with noise and ego, and Ramjet solves every problem by ramming straight through it, Dirge plays a longer, quieter game. Even his name gives him away. A dirge is a song of grief, a funeral hymn. And that's how he fights. He doesn't rush in. He lingers. He creeps. He lets fear do the heavy lifting long before the first shot is ever fired. Dirge is a master of handling fear, to the point that even other Decepticons find him unsettling. When he's preparing for combat, he withdraws completely, silent, distant, and even more morose than usual. He pours all of his focus into one thing: breaking his enemy's resolve. His reputation as a fearsome warrior isn't accidental, it's cultivated. Dirge studies fear, understands it, and weaponizes it, believing that if you can terrify an opponent early enough, the fight is already over. His mournful silence and gloomy demeanor perfectly match his specialized engines that emit an unnerving, almost funeral roar and create an aura that puts even his own teammates on edge. And here's the twist: that darkness is a mask. Dirge projects fear outwardly because he's terrified of losing control inward. The moment a situation slips beyond his grasp, that carefully maintained composure collapses into paralyzing dread, leaving him completely ineffective. Those who know Dirge well understand the tragedy at his core. Beneath the reputation, beneath the gloom and psychological warfare is someone who was never truly built for conquest. Dirge longs for a quiet, uneventful existence, something resembling peace. But he's trapped in a war that won't let him go, no matter who wins at the end. And that's where the larger irony of the Coneheads really starts to set in. Because of all that unique characterization, Dirge's especially, very little of it ever makes it past the tech specs. Like I said, on paper, Thrust, Ramjet, and Dirge are three sharply defined personalities. But once you zoom out and look at how they're actually used across the wider Transformers universe, most of that nuance quietly slips through the cracks. Instead of being treated as individuals, they're usually grouped together and deployed as a single unit. Extra jets in the sky, backup muscle, henchmen first, and characters a distant second. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the cartoon, where the Coneheads arguably got a really short end of the stick. Their debut comes in the two-part episode Dinobot Island, and it's about as unglamorous as you'd expect. Basically background characters, no lines at all. They show up, take orders, help stockpile energon cubes, and generally do standard Decepticon grunt work. No big character moments, no real spotlight. And just to really drive the point home, they ultimately get chomped up and trampled on by actual dinosaurs. So, yeah, not exactly a strong first impression. But speaking of impressions, unlike the Coneheads, I'd actually like this video and the channel itself to make a better first impression with the YouTube algorithm gods. If you're enjoying the video, giving it a like, dropping a comment, or sharing it around does way more than you'd think. It tells YouTube, hey, people are actually watching this, which helps push it in front of more Transformer fans who are probably ruminating about Coneheads somewhere else on the internet right now. That being said, whichever way you choose to help would be greatly appreciated, so thank you. So from there, it's mostly more of the same for Thrust, Ramjet, and Dirge. Show up, cause trouble, get blasted, retreat. Bad guys doing bad guy stuff. Though every now and then, one of them does manage to sneak in a moment that feels just bizarre enough to be memorable. Like in a Decepticon raider in King Arthur's court where Ramjet gets flung back to Camelot and somehow ends up competing in a jousting tournament as Rumble's steed. Naturally, he loses, defeated by the Red Knight, who's riding the Autobot warpath because, of course, that's how that episode ends. Thrust's most famous moment might be even shorter. In the Transformers 1986 movie, he gets a blink and you miss it cameo with his "oh shit, I'm screwed" face reflected on Optimus Prime's chrome grille, right before Prime plows straight through him, sending him flying through the air. And towards the end of the movie, all three Coneheads also appear to meet their end while defending Cybertron, flying straight into Unicron's mouth like a trio of very determined moths to a very cosmic flame. And yet, somehow, they're back in Season 3, and in Ghost in the Machine, both Dirge and Thrust actually get a rare win, helping to stop Ghost Starscream from using Trypticon to revive Unicron, proving that every once in a while, the Coneheads could be more than just background noise. The original Marvel Comics did slightly better, at least at first. There, the Coneheads were introduced as enforcers for Straxus, the ruthless, power-hungry Decepticon dictator ruling the Cybertron region of Polyhex. And in the UK comics, they were framed as serious threats, identified as three of Cybertron's deadliest killers. Dangerous enough, in fact, to draw the attention of the elite Autobot squad, the Wreckers, which is about as high of a compliment as you can get in Transformers terms. And then, that was pretty much it. Oh wait, Dirge does get a nice feature in an alternate reality story told in the pages of Transformers Armada by Dreamwave Comics, where he is brought in as one of Galvatron's lieutenants alongside Scourge, Bludgeon, and Thunderwing to prepare the way for Unicron. But as lofty as a herald of Unicron sounds, he basically ends up getting killed in an explosion at the end of the story. Thankfully, IDW Comics finally gave the Coneheads a little more to chew on story-wise, starting with Ramjet, who landed a rare solo spotlight issue, which leaned hard into his self-delusions of being an evil genius, as he laid out his plans to overthrow Megatron. A coup attempt that involved employing a bunch of mini Constructicons to construct a universal Cybertronic tracker to monitor all Cybertronians, using a poorly constructed human facsimile named Harrison, whose face is literally melting, to steal US missile codes to obliterate the United States, enslave both humans and Decepticons, use a super string space bridge to conquer the galaxy, and, of course, defeat Megatron. You know, simple stuff. Anyway, it ends exactly how you'd expect. Megatron already knows everything. Shows up, rips out Ramjet's spark, tears him apart, scatters his pieces, and keeps his head as a trophy. Thrust doesn't fare much better either. After taking part in countless Decepticon operations as a background character, he eventually ends up on Earth during the Decepticons' full-scale invasion of the planet. And when that invasion fails, Thrust is left behind, damaged, grounded, and trapped in the ruins of New York City. And here's the kicker. For a Decepticon whose entire personality was built around being loud, flashy, and impossible to ignore, Thrust goes out in the most unflattering way imaginable. He's found crippled by local police who deal with him by setting the building he's hiding in on fire and letting it collapse on top of him. No dramatic final stand, no roaring engines, just an off-panel death that's about as quiet and unceremonious as it gets. The Autobot Prowl, who witnesses the event, later described it as the execution of a wounded combatant, seeing as proof that humanity would never truly forgive the Transformers for the invasion. Which is dark, but also means that Thrust, of all the Decepticons, didn't even get the dignity of going out mid-monologue, and for a guy who lived for attention, that's a pretty brutal punchline. That said, even their very definitive IDW deaths don't quite stick. Ramjet and Thrust still manage to live on, sort of. Their remains are eventually recovered by the Earth Defense Command and used as the basis for a mass-produced Seeker Conehead army. No sparks, no personalities, just mindless human-controlled drones built off what was left of them. So yeah, they technically lived on, not as individuals, not as characters, but as templates, which feels oddly appropriate for two Decepticons who spent most of their careers being treated as interchangeable. But what about Conehead number 3, Dirge? Well, he actually outlives his two Cone Bros, and somehow that turns out to be worse. During Cybertron's rebirth, Dirge gets pulled into the messiest kind of conflict: internal political violence. He becomes a witness to a terrorist explosion that kills off the Aerobot barrel roll and is interrogated, and then driven into hiding as a bombshell Cerebro-controlled Prowl's ruthless Decepticon purges ramp up. For Dirge, already ruled by fear and dread, it's basically his worst nightmare made real. He spends a good chunk of his arc on the run, constantly looking over his shoulder, unsure if he's about to be silenced next. Eventually, Dirge does come forward. He testifies, helps expose the conspiracy behind Prowl's actions, and survives the political fallout. Against all odds, he makes it through the paranoia, the purges, and the collapse of Cybertron's fragile peace. And then, he doesn't. Dirge ultimately meets his end while attempting to defend Caminus from Unicron, only to be brutally cut down by Rampage, one of Unicron's Maximals, who slices him cleanly in half. It's sudden, graphic, and deeply ironic. After surviving conspiracies, witch hunts, and systematic terror, Dirge dies in a straightforward act of violence, trying for once to stand his ground. For a character defined by fear, regret, and a longing for peace, it's about as tragic an end as he could have gotten. Anyway, before we end the Conehead story on too depressing of a note, it's worth pointing out one more fun and self-aware take on the trio, or really, on the Seekers as a whole, and that comes from the 2007 series Transformers Animated. In that universe, Starscream, never one to give up on overthrowing Megatron, creates an entire squad of clones, each one resembling a familiar Seeker repaint and embodying a specific aspect of his personality. Because of course, Starscream's solution to betrayal is more Starscreams. On screen, the only Conehead we actually see is a Ramjet-ish clone, who later gets his iconic nose cone head, and who represents Starscream's most honest trait: a liar. And not one who just lies constantly, but lies badly, openly, and with complete confidence. But if you dig a little deeper, specifically through the second animated almanac, it expands on the idea even further. It includes a Thrust-like clone meant to embody envy, and a Dirge-inspired clone representing greed. Oh. So while they don't appear directly in the show, the spirit of all three Coneheads is still very much there, reimagined as fragments of Starscream's own dysfunctional personality. Anyway, as fun as it is to unpack all that psychology, at the end of the day, like most Transformers, the Coneheads are best defined by their toys. No matter how weird, clever, or let's be honest, mostly underwhelming the fiction got, Thrust, Ramjet, and Dirge are always a key part of any solid G1 toy collection. After all, their entire identity was born out of a toy mistransformation. So as I mentioned earlier, Thrust, Ramjet, and Dirge officially debuted as part of the second wave of Transformer toys in 1985, bolstering the Decepticon Air Force in a pretty big way. And here's a fun little tidbit. Some of the earliest prototypes of these dudes showed wildly different color choices. Dirge in an almost black deco, Ramjet still in white but looking far closer to Starscream, and Thrust wearing Thundercracker's familiar blue, which, yeah, probably for the best that Hasbro course corrected, because the versions we actually got are way more memorable. And honestly, that lineup pretty much locked things in. Aside from a rather questionable purple and teal Generation 2 repaint of Ramjet, which we don't need to linger on, the G1 Conehead stayed frozen in time for years. That is until Classics Ramjet showed up in 2007 and quietly kicked off the modern era of Conehead toys. And if you were collecting back then, you probably remember this era less fondly because unlike 1985 when Hasbro just put out all three Coneheads on shelves at the same time, modern collectors suddenly had to jump through hoops, chase exclusives, and sometimes drop an unreasonable amount of cash just to complete what used to be a straightforward Seeker trio. So while Classics Ramjet was easy enough to grab at retail, the other two Coneheads were a whole different story. For the longest time, Classics Dirge, basically a lazy repaint of Ramjet, and Thrust were locked behind a 2007 BotCon exclusive box set called Games of Deception. And yeah, it was expensive. Eventually, Takara stepped in and sort of set things right. In 2009, they released their own uniquely designed Dirge and Thrust under their version of the Classics line called Gente Gente. These came at a slightly higher price point, sure, but they also looked the part, with cleaner paint applications and a few tasteful bits of chrome that made them kinda feel premium. And then finally, the following year, those Dirge and Thrust molds made their way onto US shelves as part of the Generations line, which, for collectors who'd been waiting years to finish their Conehead trio without selling an organ, felt long overdue. I also think it's worth mentioning that even though none of the Coneheads actually appeared in the Bay movies, all three still managed to get surprisingly unique toys during the Revenge of the Fallen era. And when I say unique, I mean unique to each other, no shared molds. Ramjet kicks things off as a repaint of the previous movie Voyager Starscream, released as a Walmart exclusive. Thrust followed as a deluxe retool of the Autobot Breakaway, and Dirge? Well, Dirge got the weird one, a completely unique asymmetrical design that made him stand out immediately. And fittingly, he was the only one of the trio who actually rocked a proper cone on his head. But enough of that. Let's shift back to G1 Conehead territory because the next major wave of modern Coneheads is where things got even more complicated. This time around, for the Earthrise line, Thrust was actually pretty easy to track down as a straightforward single release. Dirge and Ramjet, though, were bundled together in a 2-pack, which should have been just as painless to pick up. Should have. Unfortunately, that release landed right in the middle of a little thing you might remember, the global pandemic. And aside from wrecking our respiratory systems and our social lives, COVID absolutely torpedoed shipping schedules. Pre-orders vanished, vendor allocations dried up, and the Dirge and Ramjet 2-packs, mine included, started getting quietly cancelled. And the few that did manage to make it out in the wild, well, most ended up on eBay and, as you can probably guess, selling for completely unhinged amounts of moolah. And just to rub a little more salt into the wound, this was also the moment Hasbro decided it was finally the right time to bring back the purple and teal Generation 2 Ramjet in modern form. And that guy was everywhere. Easy to find, well stocked, no drama. Same deal with this guy. And this guy. Technically, not Ramjet, sure, but both very clearly repaints of the Ramjet mold. Meanwhile, the actual Dirge and Ramjet everybody wanted? Good luck. As for me, I eventually lucked out and found a decently priced loose pair from an online seller, so I was good. But for a lot of collectors, that Dirge and Ramjet shaped hole in their shelves stuck around for years. It wasn't until Hasbro finally reissued both as single releases, Dirge in 2023 and Ramjet in 2025, that things were properly set right. For now. Because of course, this year, Hasbro has already shown off a brand new and improved Seeker mold with the Studio Series 86 Thundercracker, which means we all know what's coming next. A retooled Studio Series 86 Conehead mold is basically inevitable at this point. It never ends. Oh well, just give me a thrust with that oh shit I'm screwed face, and I'll be good. Anyway, on the masterpiece front, things are a lot more straightforward, with the key word being retool. Back in 2011, third-party company iGear got the ball rolling with their fighter team, Jet, Attack, and Elegy. These were basically heavy retools of the original MPO3 Starscream, and at the time, they were kind of a big deal, mainly because they were the only masterpiece Conehead options around. Quick side note for anyone interested, a couple of years later, iGear also put out their Conair Raptor Squadron. Not really masterpiece scale, but still pretty cool, stylized coneheads that turned into modern Raptor-inspired jets. But back to the masterpiece toys, yeah? Takara finally stepped in around 2016-2017 and released official masterpiece coneheads, all retooled from MP11 Starscream. And from a technical standpoint, yeah, these were clear upgrades over the old iGear trio. That said, they leaned a little too hard into the chunky and squat animation accurate look, and if that's your thing, then great. But for me, hard pass. Same went for the oversized and hyper-detailed offerings from Zeta Toys, as well as the admittedly very well done trio from Make Toys, Booster, Jetstream, and Endgame, that I seriously considered getting had it not taken the company a whopping 3 years to finally finish the set. Instead, I went with another third-party option from Yes Model. Still MP11 retools, but with a balance I liked a lot more. Somewhere between toy and cartoon, right size, all three released within a year, and most importantly, less chunk. And finally, for the fans of the newer masterpiece Starscream, MP52, another seemingly random pop-up company out of China offered KO retooled coneheads of that version too. Personally, not for me, as my masterpiece seeker of choice is still Crimson Wing from Deformation Space, a company that may or may not still exist, but hey, stranger things have happened. Maybe one day they'll resurface under a new name and give us a Crimson Wing conehead set. I mean, can the fruit hang any lower at this point? Speaking of fruit, do you know what kind of creature really loves fruit? A fruit bat. And while we don't have any of those on Cybertron, we do have a rat bat. I've got his story here. Or if you want to check out my latest episode, it's over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Who's your favorite conehead? Go ahead and tell me your story.